Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today I will be unambiguously defending my own honor because post my appearance on the Hippy Dippy stream, debate, whatever you want to call it, a bunch of different lies have been spread about me, specifically that I was going out of my way to intentionally and deliberately lie about District Attorney Alvin Bragg, and enough is enough. I have watched the tapes, I have gone over what was actually said, and I have found the quote that I was thinking of in my brain when I was talking about people targeting President Trump, and I will be presenting that to you as well as many more things throughout the course of this video. On top of that, as a little bit of a bonus, I will show you that by Destiny's own standard, one of the chief operators, one of the chief smear merchants against me, he in fact deliberately lied to me, again by his own standards. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
So we're going to knock out the Bragg thing first because I think this is one of the most prominent things that has been spread about me, but I do want to give credit to Connor of all people, somebody who I haven't really gotten along with in the past, for refusing to buy into the idea that I deliberately lied about this.
He's willing to lie blatantly, lie. You agree that he lied about what Alvin Bragg said, right? He lied about that.
When I am making the assertion that somebody is a liar, which I very rarely do, because I think there's all sorts of delusional cope spirals that people put themselves through in order to affirm their presupposed positions. If I go through a lie, then what I have to have is I have to know that they know something and that they are knowingly choose to say something opposite of what they should in normal circumstance know.
Whatever our differences were in the past, I definitely respect you doing so, and by the way, your faith has been rewarded because I have the quote, I have what was actually said during the debate, and I will demonstrate beyond any shadow of a doubt that I am being smeared in this regard. But let us go to the point brought up by Destiny in the conversation where he demands that I present a quote about Alvin Bragg. Let's go to that so you guys can see it.
I think everybody would
running.
agree with that,
Okay, so running on, I'm gonna find a crime to prosecute them. That's totally fine.
Did Alvin say that? I'm going to find a crime?
Yeah, he said what was the exact quote? What you call it? Cam, you were talking about it earlier that he said he was running on seeing Trump in court.
Now you guys need to understand the context of this conversation. I will link it in full in the description of this video for you could check it out. But this followed me talking about a hypothetical pro-Trump district attorney running for a state or local office and saying that they will dig into somebody in order to find a crime to charge them with or something thereabouts. This was not a direct quote, but this is what I was saying in that particular segment.
No, I asked you a hypothetical that if this were the case, but they went through the normal legal process, you would be fine with that? That's the standard?
No, because in order to make it comparable, it would have to be like the governor of New York running on trying to...
A local DA that's very pro-Trump, 90% Trump category, finds an official, charges him with the crime that he campaigned on charging him with. They present evidence in front of a grand jury. It's enough for an indictment. Very low standard, by the way. And they secure a conviction. That's like totally legit.
Now, of course, rather than properly engage with the hypothetical, these people decided that they were going to throw out a challenge related to Alvin Bragg. And at this point in time, I want to highlight something that I've been criticized for, which was tossing it over to Cam to bring up the exact quote, while I decided that I was going to go out on my own and look for this quote myself.
I think everybody would agree with that.
Okay, so running on, I'm going to find a crime to prosecute them. That's totally fine.
Did Alvin say that? I'm going to find a crime?
Yeah, he said what was the exact quote? What you call it? Cam, you were talking about it earlier that he said he was running on seeing Trump in court.
Oh, yeah. He specifically said that he was the person that had the most experience on the ballot with dealing with Trump in court.
Now, the reason I did this is because if you rewind the debate to when this came up specifically with Alvin Bragg, what you will discover is that the person who made the claim that I am currently being smeared with is in fact Cam.
Cool. I'll answer the question too. Yeah. So I don't think it's a threat to democracy. I think it's a bad and corrupt thing to do, but I don't think it's a threat to democracy. Democracy will not cease to exist if you vote for Alvin Bragg, who explicitly campaigned on going to court with Donald Trump. And also, Hutch, it seemed that Sean said almost the exact same thing, and then you attacked him as if he said the inverse. Again, strawmanning him, which seems to be your primary tactic throughout the entire debate.
The person who said he had the quote from District Attorney Alvin Bragg is in fact Cam.
So you are accusing the Biden DOJ of political prosecution, right?
Well, let me finish my point. So he says he should have went after him as soon as he got out of office. You had the special counsel bring charges on the classified documents case, but it would have been probably less political to go after him early when you weren't sure he was going to run rather than later. But it seems like they went after him and they put all these cases on the ballot. And again, most of it is not federal officials or the special counsel. It's local politicians that ran specifically on prosecuting Trump. And remember, normally you have to have evidence of a crime before you start an investigation, not as a campaign promise run on finding a crime to charge somebody with.
So right here, I'm talking about a prosecutor looking into somebody in order to find evidence of a crime, rather than you having probable cause to start an investigation, which is the normal operating procedures that a prosecutor would go through in order to find evidence of the crime. I also end this hypothetical am talking about somebody announcing their intentions. This is something that I mentioned. And by the way, this is clearly and obviously understood because Hutch ends up responding at some point shortly after this.
He had been criminally charged and convicted on these crimes. So it's not like there was some fishing expedition.
That this is not a fishing expedition. But what I'm actually referring to exactly describes a fishing expedition. Let me play you the clip.
I will be shining a bright light into every dark corner of his real estate dealings. And every dealing demanding truthfulness at every turn.
So right there, and it's dated November 7th of 2018, prior to Leticia James taking office as the Attorney General, she is pledging to a crowd that she will shine a bright light, not just into Trump's real estate dealings, which you might be able to argue in some way, shape, or form there was a case in the news that she might be referring to, but all of his dealings, and she says she's going to demand truthfulness at every turn. This is a fishing expedition. When you are telling people you're going to look into somebody in order to find evidence of a crime, and again, she was the public advocate for New York City before this. She was not an assistant attorney general or anything like that. She is promising to go on a fishing expedition. This is exactly what I was referring to in this particular moment right here. And again, it got conflated with Bragg. Maybe worst case scenario, you say I misattributed this to Alvin Bragg, but in no way, shape, or form did I go out of my way to make something up out of thin air in order to tie down Alvin Bragg and besmirch his good name, which, to be clear, he does not have a good name. In fact, the person who attributed this to Alvin Bragg was Cam, not me, and he was referring to a different quote. And you have to remember, this election was actually occurring in 2020 because Bragg was sworn in 2021, where he was arguing on the campaign that he would be the best person to take up an already existing case against Trump, and he was citing his other lawsuits against Trump as qualifications, which is still questionable behavior, but it is nowhere near at the level of what I was talking about in the hypothetical, which again was attributed to Leticia James. So for Steven, who's been calling me a liar, who's like, oh, well, he made up this specific and all that, I want to know how you're going to justify that claim right now, because I was obviously referring to something very specific and very real. It happened to be a different New York prosecutor. Now, maybe you could call this me misattributing something that Leticia James said to District Attorney Alvin Bragg, but again, the person who brought up a specific quote in this conversation about going after Trump was Cam, not me.
Correct. Yeah, in the other quote, he said, obviously, like evidence, he gave the caveats. He wasn't as bad as Leticia James, and there's no.
Hold on, to be clear, for Leticia, you also couldn't cite anything that Leticia said that was bad. Also, the idea of a guy.
No, hold on, Steven. I do have the clips of Leticia where she said to a voter on the street that you should vote for her because she's going to sue Trump.
Now, by the way, this isn't the only time Leticia James did this. When she was approached by somebody asking her about the value of voting, she ended up responding to this person in this way.
And what would you say to people who say, oh, I'm not going to bother to register to vote because my voice doesn't make a difference, or I'm just one person?
I say one name, Donald Trump. That should motivate you. Get off your ass and vote.
Will you sue him for us?
Oh, we're gonna definitely sue him. We're gonna be a real pain in the ass. He's gonna know my name personally.
I love it. He probably does already.
Again, there's Leticia James saying vote for her because Donald Trump. And when asked if she will sue Donald Trump, she's not saying we'll use all the afforded legal avenues in order to challenge anything that he's doing that's breaking the law. She says, yes, I'm going to sue him. Campaign promise directly to this individual right here.
There's no.
Hold on. To be clear, for Leticia, you also couldn't cite anything that Leticia said that was bad.
It's really critically important that everyone understand, as was mentioned by Mr. Bahara, that filing a lawsuit, simply opening up an investigation, can ruin lives. And so with respect to Donald Trump, we need to follow his money. We need to find out where he's laundered money. We need to find out whether or not he's engaged in conspiracy and whether or not he's colluded not only with Putin, but also with China as well.
Now again, you have Leticia James during the actual debates of the election in September of 2018 saying that she's going to follow Trump's money in order to see if he's money laundering and whatnot. And this is a fishing expedition because, once again, she doesn't have evidence for a crime. She's promising that she's going to just look into all his transactions in order to find money laundering, but there's nothing right now that says that she's continuing an investigation or anything that they said as defenses of Alvin Bragg, because she's just promising a fishing expedition. Look, I take accusations of me deliberately lying to people out there in the audience, to my audience, very seriously. Long-term viewers of this channel know that I will go out of my way to correct mistakes, errors that I've made on this channel with whole separate videos included in the beginning of next videos, and do anything and everything to remind you of when I am in fact wrong. In fact, even in this stream, because I believed that Cam had the goods when I couldn't find this Alvin Bragg quote, I said, you know what, I could be mistaken, I could be wrong, but Steven, of course, had to rage out like an absolute lunatic and say that I'm lying, and then continue the lie past that point, and that's when I have to address it.
For this. Now, as far as the specific quote that Destiny is asking for, it does not exist. He gave caveats. He's smarter than what you go. He's smarter than I gave him credit for in my paraphrase. So if you want to take that, that's fine.
So to be 100% clear, there is no way, shape, or form that you could say me referencing Leticia James without remembering that I'm referencing Leticia James specifically in a hypothetical is somehow me lying deliberately about District Attorney Alvin Bragg. That is just not the case. Now, I do believe, and I have presented evidence for the fact that Alvin Bragg did charge Trump for political reasons. As I said, that Bragg, who has downgraded over half of felony charges, and by the way, this doesn't even count the dismissals in the cases that he just refuses to charge people, somehow found a way to upgrade the charges against Trump, again, for political reasons, so that he can say, look, he's a convicted felon based on me going outside of my pattern of behavior and upgrading charges because specifically he was talking about a political opponent named Donald J. Trump. Now, the next lie by Destiny that I want to address that he is deliberately spreading, let's be clear about that, is the idea that I misinterpreted, deliberately so, the prompt is democracy on the ballot. Now, I did not misinterpret that prompt at all. There was no interpretation from me at all because I never received that prompt. I was messaged by Connor to debate up or down whether or not Trump would end democracy if elected. This is what I was offered as a debate. You can see it in plain text. And this is, by the way, what I agreed to actually debate.
Okay, so I sent Lauren and Sean, and I could look up the message to Lauren.
I'm going to send it to you.
But I sent the equivalent of will Donald Trump end democracy in 2024 or something like that, right? So that's an extrapolation. It's a little bit hyperbolic, etc. But of course, when you're recruiting somebody, you want to give them the most fiery version of the debate, right? And so Lauren says, what is the exact wording of the prompt? And I did send that to Lauren.
Wait, send what?
Lauren,
Can you show me these DMs somewhere?
Sure.
I just sent you one of them. This is the one that was sent to AJW.
Hold on, yeah, this is not. There's nothing wrong with this, so there must be something more.
But hold on. No, for what I sent to AJW?
No, Pisco just linked me a tweet where it's you saying, "Do you want to be debate partners with Lauren Southern against Destiny and another Democrat about whether or not Trump will end democracy if elected?"
Yes, that was my extrapolation.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that annoys me about this is that since I provided the screenshot, which by the way was demanded by Pisco, there should be no more conversation about this. This is what I was given. This is what I accepted. I would not have accepted the debate had the topic been, we're just going to argue randomly that something may damage an institution. It was an up or down question, and that's what I prepared for. There should be no argument against this because obviously this is what I was presented and what I agreed to. But instead, I get all these different ridiculous points, like from Pisco in his Twitter space, where he tries to make the case that it would have been interesting for me to bring up whether or not Kamala Harris would destroy democracy.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to bring up was, you know, we're talking about, I want to kind of go back a little bit. So the whole, is democracy on the ballot? First of all, this became the topic of the debate. The topic of the debate became the debate, right? One of the things I had an issue with is that you could assume pretty obviously from that Trump was the one that this was being discussed about. I think that's pretty obvious. But, you know, even if it weren't, you could even assume because of the rhetoric that has been going out there already about Kamala and being a communist and things like that, you could even assume in that end that it could go the way of Kamala. But obviously the more obvious one is Trump. And I think it was really interesting when we looked at how actual Justice Warrior was going about all this. You know, it was really interesting. He didn't understand the debate, but yet he kept, even when called out on it, continued to debate from the perspective as if the topic was, is democracy going to be ended?
Yeah.
Even when called out about it, he continued. And it was not up until Lauren Southern came in, and I could be mistaken on this, but until Lauren Southern came in, that this entire 30 minutes of discussing what it was, that he actually speak up and go, oh yeah, this is the issue. So
it's a really good point. I want to address first the Kamala thing. So like, yeah, that would have been a very interesting way to take it. Like if he actually argued that yes, democracy on the ballot because either A, Kamala Harris is going to institute these communist policies or policies that are like against our constitutional system, then insert thing, Or you could take the route that, well, Kamala was appointed in an anti-democratic way by I disagree with this, but that's an angle you could have taken. It. So I think that's a really interesting perspective that like, the question by its terms was not candidate specific.
Now, this was very annoying because based on the prompt that I got, my interpretation of it was that it was about Donald Trump. And the reason why is because the prompt is whether or not Donald Trump will end democracy if elected. So it would not have been a good argument if that was the question up or down to say, well, Kamala Harris would end democracy as well. That's not a good counterpoint. So I didn't prepare that specific argument because, again, that wasn't the prompt. Mine was exclusively about Donald Trump. So I came in ready to argue exclusively about Donald Trump. And by the way, Lauren ended up asking for clarification of this. So when we spoke a day prior and I said, this is the topic as presented to me, and she says, yeah, I even clarified it with Connor, I had no reason to believe that the conversation would be something completely different. Now, another lie that spawns from this is the fact that I somehow, in bad faith, never made this point about the prompt being different or about them trying to argue a different standard than what I agreed to until over an hour in when Lauren Southern joined the conversation. And this is 100% false. In my opening statement, I laid out a standard that they were going to have to prove that the evil orange man would end democracy, as in the American government.
They're going to have to explain exactly why the mechanisms of our government are going to be overthrown if presumably Trump gets elected. The fact of the matter is, our government is the longest consistent government currently going in world history at this moment in time. We have been through a bunch of different controversial elections. We have been through a Trump presidency already. So these guys are going to have to explain what would be different about Trump winning in 2024 that was different from him winning in 2016.
Around the 14-minute mark, after Hutch tried to put out what I considered to be a Weasley standard, because again, I was informed that the topic would be up or down, Trump is going to end the system if elected, I called this out.
But again, your argument seems to be that our institutions are strong enough to withstand someone like Trump. But my question is, how do you justify allowing someone to come in and check those institutions and actually stress them and see how far these checks and balances actually go to constrain him.
Well, first of all, prior to your question, you were like, well, I'm not saying democracy is going to end. I'm just saying it's going to be chipped away. So you got to kind of commit to your argument, because if you're saying it's not going to end, then you kind of agree with me in that regard, that the institutions are well suited to hold up to whatever challenges, real or imagined, that Trump will bring up. So it seems a little weaselly for you to back off of the premise of the debate by saying like, oh, well, he might chip away at our institutions. I mean, you could argue that prosecuting your political opponent is chipping away at our institutions. You could argue that using new interpretations or setting up test cases in order to set up for a future prosecution against a former president is a chip at our institutions and at the norms that we're typically used to in the United States of America. You know, the things that ultimately ended up leading to that immunity decision from the Supreme Court. That's not really the end of democracy. I don't think that our system was destroyed over the last 4 years under the Biden administration. So like, I think you got to either commit, like Stephen actually is, to some kind of crazy plot that Trump's going to overthrow our entire system of government, or not.
In fact, over and over again, well before Lauren showed up, I pointed out that they were going off the topic. And the reason I believe that is because I was presented a completely different topic. I agreed to that different topic based on those parameters. And that's what I prepared for / expected to debate. So when they started saying, oh, a threat to democracy and blah, 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 and all that, I took that as nonsense throughout the whole course of the debate. I challenged them to commit to the broader premise that I was presented. And now they're pretending like I just brought it up when Lauren got there, when that's just not the case. So all this talk about how, oh, well, it doesn't mean when you say if the Second Amendment is on the ballot or abortion is on the ballot that it's going to go away or be completely wiped out or whatever, is completely irrelevant, because I was never presented this on the ballot question. I was presented, again, in plain English, up or down, whether or not Trump would end democracy if elected. Now that, of course, leads into the next lie, deliberately being pushed by Stephen against me, despite the fact that it is completely and utter nonsense on its face. And this is the idea that, oh, the reason I argued the way that I argued is because I believe America's not a democracy, it's a republic. Now, to be clear, I do believe that, but I never made that point at all whatsoever during the Hippy Dippy live stream, and the reason I never made that point is because I understood, for the context of this conversation, that distinction made no difference.
No, I hear you. There's an interesting question about what democracy means. Recall, of course, by the way, that actual Justice Warrior, his whole position is we don't actually have a democracy. And so for his merit, there can be no threat to a democracy in America, because he said multiple times, we do not live in a democracy. So if we're going by that definition of democracy, I don't think actual Justice Warriors would raise the kind of concerns the Confederates are bringing up, because he wouldn't, of course, not agree. He would say, well, you guys are stupid. There is no democracy. You live in a republic, or whatever his phrasing is. On the actual merits of
which I find to be silly and pedantic and semantic.
Yeah, it's stupid, but the question is like,
it's not silly. Oh, it's not silly and pedantic and semantic and stupid. It's intentional. It's intentional and malicious. It's intentional and malicious.
So when Pisco just makes up out of thin air that that's literally my whole argument, and then Destiny, who is watching live, listening, says, oh, it's not that he actually believes that, he's being malicious about it, thus affirming the inaccurate assessment of my position, that is objectively a lie. And if you want to prove that it's not a lie, show me exactly where I said that on the Hippy Dippy live stream. And the crazy thing is, not having this context, I end up going on the Twitter space. Destiny asked me, is America a democracy? I say, is it a republic? And he starts making all these snide, ridiculous comments about, oh, I understand this and that.
I understand, okay? I concede all of the debate from last night. There is no threat. Yes, there is no threat to the democracy because we don't have a democracy. I understand now.
And again, I don't have any context for the fact at this moment in time that he's been lying about my argument for a full hour beforehand. And by the way, Pisco is buying into that lies. And in fact, after Destiny raged out of that Twitter space, I ended up saying, yeah, Pisco, while I do believe that, for the purposes of the conversation yesterday, I didn't make that argument because I understood in general we're talking about the American American electoral system. So in that context, I was going to fight on that point, because what's the point of fighting on that when you all, in the context of that conversation, get when you're talking about democracy, you're talking about the United States governing system.
It sounds like you're acknowledging that there are different definitions of democracy that you're working with. If you're saying that in the context of the debate I prepared with, I'm using a different definition of democracy.
Please go.
Yeah.
Don't be retarded. In the conversation, we were asked if Trump would end democracy. So I interpreted that as we're calling America a democracy, like our current governing system and how we choose our representatives and all that for that conversation. If you asked me, is America a democracy or a republic, I would opt for the America as a republic, which is completely different. Now, I didn't once do the little thing where I was like, technically America's not a democracy throughout the whole debate, because that would have been pointless and wouldn't have gotten us anywhere. What I did do was try to argue what we actually agreed on, or what I was actually invited to debate, which apparently I'm supposed to psychically like understand that it's actually something different. How?
Sean, so first of all, I totally appreciate you making those clarification points, because I wasn't sure. Because in terms of the first part of what you said, and I'll get to the second part. The first part you're saying is like, of course, when I come into the debate, I'm using democracy in the sense of the American constitutional system. I'm not using this more narrow version of democracy, which I wouldn't apply in more general terms to America.
Now, again, if you have any evidence that I made this claim during the Hippy Dippy live stream, present that evidence. Show that evidence. If you have any evidence that I was presented the actual topic and that I would have agreed to the actual topic, which is vague, oh, is this a threat? Is this potentially bad or that? Then present that. Tell me how, in my mind, on my honeymoon, when I got this request and I agreed to this based on these terms, I actually psychically knew that they were presenting something completely different to the other side. I want that presented to me. And by the way, as late as the community tab, where I posted the link to this live stream, I was still using the same language that was originally presented to me. Right here on the community tab, I will be live at 8:15 Eastern Standard Time debating whether Trump will end democracy with Destiny and others. Read. So just to recap, it is 100% unreasonable, as in a standard that no other person would be expected to be held to receive this message from Connor, which says up or down, will Trump end democracy if elected, for me to assume that the topic is completely different than what was being presented to me by the person who recruited me onto the show. Connor has acknowledged that this was his error, his mistake. I don't think there was anything malicious about it. I know a lot of people in my audience are saying that it's a setup, but the fact of the matter is, they're expecting me to be able to argue something completely different that I probably wouldn't have even agreed to in the first place based on this prompt, and then claiming the extra step that I'm going out of my way to bad faith interpret a prompt that was never presented to me, and again, I would not have agreed to. If Stephen Pisco, Hutch, any single lefty were put in the same position I was put in, were offered to and agreed to terms that I agreed to, and then things were completely different by the time that they showed up to the conversation, then I would not blame them for somehow receiving the different terms and agreeing to them. On top of that, throughout the whole course of the conversation, because again, this was the premise that was presented to me, I was like, fine, we can move on from this if you would just concede this point, and Destiny refused to do so.
It's so what Dylan intended when he wrote the question. Just concede that that you do not know that Trump is going to be a dictator, and let's move on.
If somebody says that immigration is on the ballot, does that mean that you...
So for Stephen to assert that it's absolutely crazy for me to interpret is democracy on the ballot, again, something that I never received, never interpreted, to mean whether or not Trump will end democracy if elected in 2024, which is exactly what I did receive, and then also refuse to concede that point to move on to another part of the conversation, is intentionally bad faith, and by the way, completely stupid. It's ridiculous that he's making these two arguments out of both sides of his mouth.
What they're saying is that if Donald Trump were to come and be a dictator for 1 year, and then he were to be ousted from office, and then people were to, repair everything, and then we set ourselves back on the right course, they would say like, oh, then it wasn't a threat, I guess. That's what they're, that's an...
Yeah, that's silly.
But hold on, wait. Do you acknowledge, you just said that's silly. You acknowledge that was their position.
Okay. Yeah.
No. Wait. Why are you saying okay or sure? No. Yes. That was their position. Yes.
I'm about to use the N-word again, Pisco.
That's fine. I don't care. I love the N-word.
Now, another lie from Steven is that I made the claim or made the argument that if Trump became a dictator for 1 year, then that would be perfectly fine as long as things went back to normal. In fact, I made the exact opposite argument, and this stems from him asking me if Hitler is a threat to democracy, in which I responded after being cut off a million times with the distinction from an election like the Hayes election, which was very wonky in how it happened, super questionable, resulted in the Hayes Compromise, which is a stain on American history, and of course, somebody actually overthrowing the system.
So it took a regime fall for democracy to return to Germany and several decades of Western occupation in Germany for that democracy to be restored to Germany. Okay, so that's not what happened in the Rutherford B. Hayes case that Sean cited earlier, where this exact thing that you're claiming will overthrow democracy happened, and it resulted in democracy continuing on to today. Clearly, you agree that democracy exists today. Otherwise, you wouldn't be arguing that it's on the ballot.
Democracy in Germany exists today. You just proved Destiny's point. The idea that democracy is only threatened if it's permanently ended is stupid. Now you're moving the goalpost again.
We're saying that it will happen without a regime.
If there's a decade.
Hey guys, editing Sean here, and I just realized that the reason why Destiny is misstating my position right here is because in order to perform for his audience, he started playing piano, which I'm sure you can hear on his stream or his version of the stream if that even exists. So he deliberately, in a bad faith way, ignored the answer to his question and then ascribes the position to me and my panelists that he didn't hear the refutation for. Also, this guy right here in the corner, he shows up at some point when Lauren does. He adds nothing of any intellectual value to the whole conversation. Just throwing that out there.
If there's a decades-long gap in between democracy and dictatorship, that's something else.
Yeah. All right. So do you think that there's a meaningful difference? I'm just going to ask you of having external governments overthrow your dictatorship and then install a democratic government in half your country, by the way, because the Soviet Union took over the other half, or at least, whatever. They split the country, but. Do you think there's a meaningful difference between that and then an election that's contested, that has this stupid electors thing, and then a corrupt compromise that's one of the stains on American history, but then the next election functions as normal? Do you understand that there's a difference?
Okay, I understand there's a difference, so there's nothing.
Now, the distinction that I make should be obvious, but I guess I'll explain it between the Hayes election or Bush v. Gore or any questionable election in American history, which is whether or not, despite the questionable nature of said election, the system functions as normal. This is obviously not applicable if somebody is a dictator for any period of time. So no, this would not be comparable to saying that if Trump was a dictator, acted as a dictator for a full year, then this would somehow not qualify as ending democracy. There is no interpretation of what I said in response to the Hayes versus Hitler question that could be read that way, yet Steven goes on and presents this as if it is actually my legitimate argument that I put forward. It is obviously not true. This is obviously yet another lie from Steven, but let's move on to another one.
Do you agree that the Civil War wasn't a threat to democracy? Because that was in another country, right?
Is the Civil War? That's actually an interesting question.
No, it's not. They weren't another country. They weren't. They didn't have the legal right to secede. Just because you say you do doesn't mean you do.
Democracy, if these people wanted to secede, and then they ended up going to war with the other half of the country.
Nope.
I don't
wasn't
know.
another country. You defined it as external country, external occupation.
A conflict from within the country about whether or not you could break apart. Is that that's actually an interesting question.
No, it's not. Hold on. No, it's very easy to solve. We came back immediately after.
So Steven got really mad right here that I said it was an interesting question whether or not the Civil War counts as a threat to democracy, as in ending our current system of government. But the fact of the matter is, I thought it was an interesting question. This was a compliment to him because it was something that I did not consider in the context of the framework that I was describing. Now, the reason I thought this was an interesting question is because the southern states wanted to leave the Union and form their own new confederacy. By contrast, the Union government could have maintained power without the southern states. So the question is a reduction in the size of the Union an inherent threat to the Union? Could the system not function without those southern states? And again, this is still an interesting question. Now, what I was also thinking speaking about is all the various places that want to break away from a larger structure, and if I would consider that a threat to democracy if those people were willing to do so. So of course we had referendums on leaving the Soviet Union. Now the Soviet Union was an authoritarian government, so you might say that's different, but we also have the Catalonian people trying to leave Spain. And yes, while it is objectively a threat to Spain if they were to leave, does that mean it's undemocratic for them to do so, and it would ruin the democracy in Spain if they were allowed to do so? I also brought up again on Twitter the example of the Irish trying to separate, which ultimately they ended up doing. And the reason I brought up these three examples on Twitter, and would have brought up these three examples had I actually been able to speak without Destiny raging out like an insane maniac, is because they are three different sets of facts, all based on the premise of leaving your larger governing structure, and one of them was actually successful. By the way, the Irish one actually involved violence in the process and probably was a huge threat, and I would have been curious to work through these examples as an intellectual exercise to understand exactly what is intended by the Civil War example. On top of that, in order to secure the victory of the Civil War, the Union occupied the South, denied people that likely would have been elected from being able to hold political office in order to make sure the Union was maintained. This is a change in the way that the constitutional order operated previous to then. It was something that lasted for about 12 years until the Hague's Compromise. Now, for me, somebody who is a Northerner who holds absolutely zero sympathies for the Confederacy, I was also wondering if this would be technically violative of the standards that Stephen and Hutch put out, because while I think it's justified to repress the Southern democracy post them declaring a civil war on you, which again was the deadliest war in American history, the fact of the matter is this involved them overriding their norms, using the military to do so, and repressing their ability to have even local democracy to a certain extent. So yeah, that's what I was considering. That's why I thought the question was interesting. Little did I expect debate bro Steven, who's always interested in these intellectual exercises, to have a meltdown, throw a hissy fit, and rage out about it for days after the fact, when it was not even me saying no, it was not something that wasn't a threat to the United States of America, but it was just an interesting question that I wanted a little bit more time to think about. Apparently you can't do that. Steven can have all the thought exercises that he wants, because again, completely different standard for him than for anybody else, but for me, I'm a horrible bad person for even thinking about the implications of the question rather than giving a knee-jerk, non-well thought out answer, because in a debate, in a conversation, you're not actually trying to have a conversation. You're expected to just knee-jerk respond to everything like that, and then that's it, because that's what the people are looking for. No, that's not how I work. That's not how I think. Maybe that is the limited way that Steven thinks, but honestly, I don't even believe that to be the case. This is just another way for him to turn around and try to smear me, which I've proven throughout the course of this video is exactly what he intentionally and deliberately did. Now look, as of right now, I don't remember any other additional lies that are being spread about me from this particular conversation, so I'm deciding that I'm gonna leave it here. As per usual, if you guys like the video, you can show them by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me completely disproving all of the nonsense that Steven is spreading about me, and of course his buddies are spreading about me. Till next time.